Welcome to God-Sized Stories. It's great talking to you again.
Thank you. It's so wonderful to be with you, Patricia. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, I wanted to start by telling us, like, from all your previous works, like how on pain and forgiveness, how does this book offer a different approach?
Well, I think there's a couple of things that make this book a little different. The first is I co-authored it with my therapist, Jim Kress, and Dr. Joel Mudumali, who is the resident theologian at Proverbs 31 Ministries that I work with all the time. These two men were really profoundly helpful for me in my unexpected and unwanted divorce. So I felt like I had amazing access to get unique help from them, both from a therapeutic standpoint and a biblical theological standpoint. And I just couldn't keep it to myself. I knew that other people, specifically other women, were looking for this information and it was hard to find. So I think this book is really important for that reason, to have these other two tender male voices contributing to it. Um, the other reason that I feel like this book is different is because it goes right to a very, very specific audience. And, a lot of my books, um, women have read them because they've been through similar hard things, but this one goes right to that person who's truly trying to survive an unwanted divorce. And I wanted to be able to give her the biblical confidence and the emotional fortitude to know how to walk through potentially the toughest season of her entire life, but not shrink back when it's time to have conversations that will inevitably come up when she's going through this hard season. And I think so many women who are walking through an unwanted divorce, and certainly there's men as well, but I think there's been Bible verses weaponized against them that's caused unnecessary hurt and pain. And I
Yes.
want to step in, and I'm not going to tell women what to think, but I am going to give them a lot to think about.
I love it that you bring both a counselor, your counselor, and a theologian to this context. That's so, so important because, of course, as believers, we want to do God's will, right? We want to stay inside the context of righteousness, of living a life of righteousness. And we know, and a lot of people say, yeah, but God hates divorce. What do you say to that, Lysa?
Well, I say let's open up the scriptures and let's see what the Bible actually does say. That interpretation of Malachi 2:16 did not come about until the King James version. And we know the King James version was not the first version of the Bible. Before that, we have the Hebrew Bible translated into Greek, which is called the Septuagint. If we go back to the original language and really do some work around the word study, we find that the word hate is a very important word. Where's the hate coming from and who is it directed toward? So when you do language study, and obviously um, there are some theologians that highly debate this word that we're talking about, but I will say that it appears as if a much better translation is when a man hates and divorces his wife, he does violence against the one he should protect, thus says the Lord. Actually, the NIV and several other versions of the Bible now have adopted this. So you'll see when a man hates and divorces his wife, he does violence against the one he should protect. Thus says the Lord, with a footnote that then carries you down to what the King James Bible says, and that is God hates divorce. Do I think that God hates what divorce does to people? Absolutely. But I think the hatred is toward the one who is causing destruction in the marriage and doing violence against the very person, his spouse, that he's supposed to be protecting. And I think that this is a really important distinction that we need to pay attention to. I think a lot of Christians, that's the one verse that they know about divorce. And, I think that it's often said to protect marriage. And I do think that marriage should be protected. But as my good friend Leslie Vernick says, there's a big difference between a difficult marriage and a destructive marriage. And I think we've got to give very tender care to those people who are walking through destructive marriages because that's a whole different beast.
I love that. And that is so true because we also know that God does not want us to be abused. And
Right.
a lot of women stay in abusive relationships, right? Because they are afraid of being disqualified as Christians by getting a divorce. So talk to the lady out there who is in a very abusive relationship and show her the biblical perspective and also the psychological perspective that you found in this work, by your research together with your two co-authors about how their point of view is more of a legalistic point of view of what they have been told rather than what God's heart is for women.
Yes, so glad you're asking this question. So Joel does the entire biblical theology of the word divorce, what the Bible actually says and does not say. And I think it's really important to go all the way back to the Old Testament and remember some crucial things we find out in Exodus. So the rabbis were permitted to give the permission for a certificate of divorce, and there were three buckets, if you will, with this. There was abandonment, there was like physical abandonment, there was emotional abandonment, and financial abandonment. Now, tied in there, of course, there is sexual infidelity, but even more than that, it's when a man decides to just basically no longer take care of his wife. And in that patriarchal society, that meant great destitution for the woman potentially. So
Yes.
what would happen is the rabbis would go and encourage the man to take care of his wife and stay faithful to his wife and try to do marriage repair. But if repair was not possible because the husband was incapable or unwilling of being a faithful, good spouse, non abusive spouse to his wife, then the rabbi would instruct the man that if he was unwilling or incapable, then he needed to give her a certificate of divorce and he needed to give her the dowry so that financially she could take care of herself. Now, why was the certificate of divorce so important? Well, because without that, the woman would most likely not even be able to be cared for by her family because a woman without the certificate of a divorce carried great shame to that family. And so, what would happen oftentimes is a man would toss a woman aside. He would not give her the certificate of divorce. He would not give her the dowry. And if that was the case, then the woman was left destitute, often having to, in order to just survive, turn to prostitution. So you can see this certificate of divorce was a great protective element for a woman in a patriarchal society so that she would not become completely destitute because of the bad behavior of her husband. And so the rabbis had a means by which to make sure that these women were taken care of, even if the husbands no longer wanted to be married. And so, it's with that context that when we get in the New Testament, Jesus, as he's teaching about sexual infidelity and the different reasons for divorce, those things would have been already assumed and it would have already been in people's minds because they were very, very familiar with what it says in Exodus. And so I think it's really important. Joel does a phenomenal job of not only writing about this in a way that the average everyday person can understand it, but for the people who want to take a deeper dive, he has done his work to really footnote things and give people resources and access to where to go in order to do a deeper theological dive on this very delicate subject.
Very good. Well, I love it. And of course, we could talk for so long just about, the biblical context, because you have a lot of that. And anybody who reads this book is definitely going to find the answers to those questions concerning divorce and what the Bible says. And I love it that you dive into not just the original text, but the cultural text as well. It's always so important. But let's talk about abusive relationships. Let's talk about a woman that is in an emotionally abusive relationship. So, what are some of the signs that you may have even experienced yourself, or that you have seen with friends, of emotional abuse or manipulation that women might not recognize as valid reasons for separation?
Yes. Okay. So I think there's a lot of terms that people use today, and let's just put a couple of them on the table. One is gaslighting. Gaslighting is when one person is lying to the other person and almost creating a dynamic where it's creating the crazy making effect. And so if you see your husband with a phone in his hand, a burner phone in his hand, but he says, no, it's not a burner phone. It's a remote control. Now, you know, it's a burner phone because you could see it, but he stuffs it in his pocket and says, no, it's a remote control. And then he never will show you the phone. And so then you spend a year looking for the burner phone, trying to figure out what's real, what's not real. And it's very confusing because maybe he's still taking you on date nights. Maybe he's saying all the right things. Maybe he's doing all the right things. Meanwhile, there's this uneasiness because you know that he's lying to you, but you can't prove that he's lying to you. And so you start to wonder, maybe I'm the one that's crazy. So gaslighting is very emotionally destructive. And anytime there are secrets that one person is forced to keep of another person, secrets always take a toll on their keeper. And if you are keeping secrets for your spouse, destructive secrets, secrets that, would potentially cause him to face consequences, but you're preventing those consequences because you also would suffer consequences if his secrets came out. Again, that's emotionally destructive. And so I think there's a lot of those kinds of behaviors. Now, obviously, everything is on a scale. And if it is a mistake that a spouse makes, then that's one thing. You can handle the mistake. There can be humility, there can be repentance, all of that. But if it's crossed the line from being a mistake to a destructive pattern in this relationship, then we really have to pay attention to the damage that it's doing to the one that's being hurt and wounded in the relationship. So, I am not a proponent of divorce. Like, I don't want to be out here, like ringing the bell, like, yay, divorce. Divorce is amazing. That is not at all what I want. I am pro marriage. I am pro healthy marriage. And all marriages have difficulties they have to work through. But when the marriage gets into being a destructive relationship where one image bearer of Christ is being damaged by the other image bearer of Christ, then we cannot elevate the institution of marriage over the protection and health and well-being of an image bearer of Christ. And I think that's really important to pay attention to. There's so much about emotional abuse, I could say, but another one that I've seen quite often is stonewalling, where there is something that happens in the relationship, and let's say the wife asks the husband about something she's seen, something she's heard, she's quite concerned about it, and he shuts her down and refuses to talk to her and basically ignores her for a very long time. I saw in one relationship, this went on for 6 months. The husband did not talk to the wife for 6 months. He would only communicate with her through the kids. That is emotionally destructive. And so, again, there's a scale. If it happens like a day, then maybe we need to go to a counselor and work on this. But if it's happening for months and months and months and months, and it's causing the deterioration, the destruction of one of the two people inside the marriage, then professionals need to get involved, and we need to decide, like, what is the right recourse here to make sure the one being damaged in this relationship at the hands of the other is being well taken care of.
Yes, I think that a lot of women, they lose sight of the fact that it takes two to tango, right? So like if your partner is not willing to recognize that they are in the wrong, that they are abusing you in any way, then there's a problem there. There's no way that you can fix the marriage by yourself. And I think that we women, right, we mothers, we're fixers, right? And that's just it's a huge tendency that women have. And so it makes it very hard. But one thing that you talk about in the book is you talk about when life is falling apart, right?
Mm.
When like women are feeling like their life is falling apart, and you use this sentence that I love. By the way, you are one of my you love I love your words. Your the way that you say some things like nobody else. And you said hold yourself together while falling apart. Can you explain that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, another big tactic of emotional abuse that we really have to pay attention to is verbal abuse. The things that one spouse may say to the other that are just so psychologically damaging, and that's very concerning. And so, what I mean by holding yourself together, even when your marriage is falling apart, is really paying attention to who you let speak into the value and worth of who you are as a person. And why would we let someone like an unfaithful spouse, why would we let someone who has lied to us over and over and over and over suddenly be a voice of truth in our life? Like if they've lied about so many other things, why would we then give so much credit to their words about the lies they're speaking over us? And the reason this is so important to pay attention to is because sometimes lines that are spoken over us, things people say to us, especially in the closeness of us, one spouse to the other, a line spoken over us can become a lie we believe. And then that lie that we believe becomes a label that we could put on ourselves. And that label we put on ourselves then becomes a liability in all of our future relationships. So I think it's very, very important to start untangling some of those lines that have been spoken over to us and really question some of those lies that we believe. 2 Corinthians 10:5 says we need to take every thought captive to make it obedient to Christ. And so holding that up, is this in tandem with what God says about me? And oftentimes it's not. Look, the love between one spouse to the other, each spouse should be seeking the other one's highest good. And when one person is seeking the other spouse's highest good, but then this person is diminishing this other person, the spouse, it's really crucial that we pay attention to this. And here's another thing that I think holding yourself together while your marriage is falling apart, don't try to go at it alone. Watch the words that you talk when you're with safe people. Are you minimizing the bad that your spouse is doing and trying to maximize the little tiny bit of good? If that's the dynamic, when you're with safe people, you've got to auto correct that, right? You've got to start telling the people that are willing to do this with you, safe people, good people. Maybe it's one of your best friends who's a Christian and who wants to help you through this, pray through this. Maybe it's a trusted counselor. Maybe it's a trusted pastor, whoever it is that you're talking to. If this is a trusted person, you've got to be honest about what you're really experiencing. And then it's going to be crucial when you put out honesty that that other person believes you and doesn't seek to start, trying to make excuses. Well, is it really as bad as what you say? Because typically what I found, and in my case, I was minimizing the bad while trying to maximize the good. And the hardest person for me to be honest with, honestly, was myself.
Absolutely. I love that because that's a very important factor that we try to really excuse a lot of times the people that we love. Um, well, and for those, and you touched a very important subject because in the book you talk about how some people, sometimes with good intentions, they did a lot of harm to you, right? Trying to, in the messages that they gave you during the process, what you were going through. And anybody that knows your story knows that you have tried and tried and tried. Like when you say that you are not pro divorce, you showed us, you showed the world that was the case. And but for those who have a family member or a friend, right, who is going through an unwanted divorce, what can they do to help? And more importantly, what can they like not say, just withhold from saying to not to cause more damage?
Well, that's one of the reasons why Jim Crest, Dr. Joel Mutamali, and myself is why we wrote this book. Because it's not just for the person who's facing the unwanted divorce, it's also for friends who want to support that person. And I encourage you, get a copy for yourself as a friend, and then give a copy to that person who's walking through trying to survive an unwanted divorce and read it together. Because there will be a lot to unpack within the context of the wisdom that's in that book that will really help guide your conversations to healthier, more productive places.
Very good. Well, we're getting to the end of our conversation, which we could talk all day about it and other things as well, Lisa. I love talking to you, but I want you to talk to a woman who's going through a situation like that, whether they are in an abusive situation and contemplating divorce, or they are going through divorce. And I want you to encourage them, and they feel very lonely in this walk, which I'm sure you can relate to that. What would you like, one thing that you could tell them, talk to them right now?
Yeah, I would say be very, very careful when you are alone with your own thoughts, not to overly romanticize what happened in the past. And what I mean by that is I tell the story in the book where one of my friends was going through an unwanted divorce, and she opened up her bathroom cabinet one day, and her husband, one of his jobs, their whole married life was to fold the towels. And he liked things folded just so. And so she opened up her bathroom cabinet and the towels had dwindled down to the last two towels. And she called me when she had driven to work. She was sitting outside the parking lot at her workplace and she was just crying. And she was saying, like, it's such a visual reminder, like he's disappearing from the house. And I said, okay. I said, this is going to be really hard to do, but I want you to be brave for a second. And I want you to answer a couple of questions. Has your husband been cheating on you the vast majority of your marriage? She said, yes. Was your husband cheating on you when he folded those towels? She said, yes. I said, okay. So was he folding those towels out of a pure act of love toward you? And she said, no. And I said, chances are he was folding those towels. He could have been folding them while he was talking to his mistress. He could have been going over to her house and folding the towels. And I don't say this to create pain. I say this because reality is really important. Mental health is a commitment to reality at all costs. And so what can sometimes happen is we get knee deep in the separation that we need and that's healthy and that we've all agreed upon, and then we get lonely. And then it's really easy to call someone who feels comfortable. And even when someone has abused us, they still at times feel comfortable. And we can start to think, well, it's better to dance with the devil that I know than try to dance with the devil I don't know. I don't know how to handle this loneliness. So I'm going to call, I'm going to bring him right back, and we start all over again. And so I sat there with her and I said, so those towels, this is a really pivotal moment for you. And it's not about the towels, it's what the towels represent. I said, it's time for you now to take agency. You get to decide how you want your towels folded. You can fold them in squares. You can fold them in rectangles. You can roll them in a little, twisted knot. You can fold them like they do in animal shapes on cruise ships, or you don't have to fold them at all. You can just pile them up, stuff them in the cabinet, close the cabinet, and deal with it another day. The point is that at this point, if you are walking through an unwanted divorce, the destruction has been done. You have finally accepted to face reality. You want to move on and hold yourself together even when things are falling apart. You've got to make sure, don't go into the past and make it rosier than what it actually was. Keep reality factored into why you're at this place in the first place. And I will
Um,
say to you, you're going to make it. You're going to have days where you feel like you won't make it. And I certainly had those days. But if I can make it, so can you. I believe you. When you are listening today and you're thinking about all the hard things you faced, I believe you. And if no one else in this world ever dares to say it, I'll say it. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry he did what he did. He said what he said. He left when he left. I am so sorry. But friend, it is time to put a stake in the ground and say, I deserve to stop suffering because of what another person has done. It is time for me to move on with the Lord.
what a beautiful advice, Lisa. Thank you so much. I know that this is going to speak to women out there who need to hear this message, but most of all, everyone, there's no time for us to talk about all the rich content of this. You have questions. You're going through a trial that probably one of the hardest trials that someone can go through in life.
Mm.
And you're going through it. And Lisa has proven the truth of Romans 8:28 over and over again. She has made all the hard things that have happened to her for her good, understanding that the God allowed them for her good and turn out for his glory. And this is no different. So go get this book. She's giving away a copy of the book to someone in my audience. So go there, enter in the form your name and phone and your email, and maybe you get the copy. But anyway, all the links that you need to talk to be connected to Lysa and to purchase this book are going to be in my show notes. Lysa, what a blessing to talk to you again. And
Thank you so
God
much.
bless you. God bless you again. And I hope to talk to you your next book. I can't wait to see it.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day.
You too. Bye.